Hello again. I'm going to make some comments about a wheel gauge or wheel marking gauge. These have been around, I'm guessing, at least 30 years. I know that all the time that I've been making furniture, which is 27 years, I haven't had one, and I know that for most of those years I know they've been available. So all this time I haven't had one, and I see them constantly on YouTube, woodworkers and everything. I hear everybody talking about them, and I'm thinking, gee, there must be something I don't know here that I'm doing without and don't even realize what I'm missing out on. And to hear some people talk, I mean, you wouldn't even pick up another gauge, let alone make your own. Obviously there's channels making their own, but then when you see them using them, a lot of times this is what they're picking up and using. And so I kind of got confused, and I thought, you know, I think I'll buy one. So I bought kind of an entry-level model. It has the basic components of the better ones, but it's a very basic model. It recesses into the head. It has a circular hardened steel cutter, which was completely and utterly dull and unusable to me. It has a round circular beam with graduations, has metric and imperial, which is nice. The thumb screw turn, which is nice for setting. You can set it easily, which is a sales benefit to it. I mean, a sales pitch for it is that you can set it like that very accurately and quickly, and now you've matched the thickness of that material, so there's a plus there. The tool was dull. I had to take it out of the package. I put it on one of the fine diamond stones and went in a light circular motion and refined that edge and sharpened it. It probably needs more sharpening, but I got it pretty sharp. Now it'll make a line. Out of the package, like I say, it was virtually unusable. But what I'm going to do is, I'm not trying to just badmouth the tool. I'm going to make some test marks with it. It is an essential tool. It's not just for the hand woodworker. I think the machine woodworker, if he's not using these kinds of layout tools, he needs to, because he probably doesn't realize why he's having some of the failures that he's having, because he's not laying out, taking the time, he's trying to skip through the layout. Whereas the hand tool guys know, they know what I'm talking about, that these are essential tools. They're not handy to have. You have to have these tools. You have to use these tools, and you need multiple ones. One is not usually enough. So I had it in my tool list as an essential tool. I said to buy a mortise and marking gauge, combination gauge. That's hard for you to make. It gets you going and gets you moving, and then as soon as you've made your horses and made your bench, now you begin to make gauges, and you should right away make gauges. You should make bench hooks, you should make aids for the bench, and a mallet and some other things. So anyway, I'm going to move the camera and we'll make some test marks. Because the tool is essential and is necessary and is used in nearly every project, or should be, any kind of linear furniture projects, and with joinery and so forth, it's an essential tool, and it's worth talking about until we get it right with these tools. So I'm going to move the camera and make some cuts and talk a little bit more about these gauges. Now, with the store-bought one out of the way, you can set that aside. A regular marking gauge is a pen. It's a round pen that comes to a point. It drags a line through the material. So in soft woods it tears a line. In any wood it tears a line. Hardwoods it's not so bad. Softwood it gets pretty rugged. I'll show you in a minute. But it is a pen like almost a nail sticking through there. They typically come too deep and you need to pull them back out a little bit. This is a classic design and worth emulating. In fact, I've kind of gravitated to this design. I could probably flip this stock around, because I prefer the thumb screw away from my finger. And the more I make them, that's where I want it. I either want the stock away, like if it's a big screw like that, I want it away from my hand and toward my finger. If it's in the way of my finger, then I'd have it the other way. But there's a good spot and a bad spot depending on whether you're right-handed or left-handed. I just made one in a video like this, put the thumb screw in the top, and I'm trying that. Works pretty good because I can go like this a lot of the time, but in general I would not say I like the screw at the top. I probably like it better on the far side. like this, although this is on the wrong side, but I think I could flip the stock around and it would be fine. Just made one the other day out of oak. Put the screw on this side. It really feels good to me. So I've kind of come full circle on how to do these. Now, sometimes I'll put a screw in the end and file the screw, and that's great for soft woods and certain applications. I did that on this one in the video. Since then I took the screw out and put a nail in, because my most preferred marker, to be honest with you, is a nail. The nail is the most versatile, and what I do to kind of strike a balance between pin and cutting, pin gauge versus cutting gauge, is I file the nail. I would drill a hole, pound this nail through with a hammer because it's that tight, have it sticking up too much, and then I'll pull it back out when I'm ready. But before I do, I take a file and I file this way, and I lean the file on the outside and file it this way. And I get that nail to two flat planes that come up to like a miniature knife edge. And that makes for a really multi-purpose, multi-use gauge. I'm going to file out, kind of simulate what I do here. If you will make this gauge and do that with the gauge, you can create, really kind of capture the best of both worlds between cutting gauge and marking gauge, like that. And that gets very sharp in there. And if it gets too fine, then take a hammer and tap it down. I've got a hammer. If you periodically, you may sharpen this once a year or twice a year. If you're using it a lot, you may sharpen it more. And if you do and it's getting too small, then take a hammer and tap it down a little bit. And give yourself a little bit more meat there. Now, let's make some lines, and let's just see if I've really been doing without or missing out with a wheel gauge. I'm going to adjust the camera, take this out of the vise. Got some oak, some pine, real soft veneer plywood. I had a piece of poplar over here I'll grab. It's kind of a medium hard, soft hardwood, but medium hardness. I'll focus and zoom a little bit and see what I can do, and we'll see what you can see. I'll start out with the wheel gauge set. Put my glasses on here. It's about a ½ inch of length here. And I'll do it in a soft pine. Now that the wheel's sharp, make one good firm pass. And that is I can see it in the room light. There's a second pass. I can see that line. I can work with that line, but it's probably not much good to me for very many operations. Depends on what. If it's just to see that there's a line there, maybe if I'm sawing into that line, that may be enough. I may have to put pencil on it to see it. It's not really all that usable to me. In fact, I kind of question whether I could maybe make a fine pencil line and do just fine with the pencil line, because I could probably almost make a pencil line that good. But it is a little better maybe than a pencil line. If I keep dragging it and keep marking it, I can darken the line. I'm somewhat crushing the fibers, but probably cutting them as much as I'm crushing. Now I've got a good line, and very useful in soft wood. Let's try with the grain. I've done it before. I know it makes a good usable line. See if you're in frame there. I could probably focus, zoom a little bit and get a little better focus there. Something like that. So here's the cross grain line, certainly very useful after multiple passes. Here's the long grain line, useful. So it's soft wood, this is okay. Is it really something I've been missing out though? Let's try my homemade gauge, but let's set it a little farther away. I'll set it in about an inch. And that has a little bit of tear to it. There's 2 light passes. Definitely a little bit of tearing. It's a usable line, although I probably wouldn't want that. I'd probably want to just either pencil line it or go more to a cutting gauge. And that's what I'm leading up to, is that if you take my silly old, this is one I made maybe 10 years ago, silly little cutting gauge. It's just a knife edge, not a breakaway knife, epoxy on the end of the beam, and it's in about 3/4 of an inch. You can do a trailing edge with that knife. And this will make the ultimate best line in soft wood. Razor sharp. Actually cut the fibers. I can chisel to that line. I can saw to that line. I can do a lot of things with that line, and that's useful to me in one good light pass. It's the middle line. So the clear winner is the cutting gauge. The homemade gauge, it kind of depends on the sharpness of the nail too. Here's another one. This one cuts a little better than my most recent one, I think, because it's sharper. So, you know, part of that's playing into that on that one is the fineness of the line and how well I've prepared that little point. Sometimes I do them faster than other times and maybe make them better. I think what I'm going to tell you is, let's flip it over. Yeah, there's better already. That's a good clean, more cutting than tearing by far. A clean, very visible line. So this is kind of striking a balance, but maybe still slightly inferior to the wheel gauge if you do multiple marks with the wheel gauge. The wheel gauge, a big selling point is you can roll off the end, and people act as if you couldn't ever do that. And I don't know why they do that, because with this gauge, I come in and mark and go, and I go from here and go. You know, so if I'm on the end and I mark up to that line, I mean, the two meet up perfect. There was no confusion about where that line is and where it continues on around the corner. So, I mean, is that really that much harder? I don't think so. So this rolling, which seems to be good, I don't know that it's really that big of a selling point to me, to be honest with you. I have other gauges we could be trying. Here's one with a washer. It's been filed or ground to a point, and I know this sucker works good in multiple materials. It's a good intermediate line, arguably better than the wheel gauge. It is better than the wheel gauge, or at least as good, if not better. Not quite as good as the cutting gauge, not quite as clean. And it rolls around the corner if that's a big thing to you. So I'm just making comparisons. These are just my opinions. It's not, you have to decide for yourself. Let's try Poplar with the wheel gauge. That's a very faint line, but it's a very good line. It's a clean. 2 passes is a very good, useful line. Let's try it in oak. I've got a clean, pristine end here in oak. We can use the wheel gauge. That's a faint line and needs a lot more depth to it. If I make 3 passes or so, that begins to be a very good usable line. So I'm satisfied with that. Let's try the cutting gauge in oak. 1 clean, good pass is just utterly perfect. Again, I don't think you could beat that line. Now, if you're trying to make that line disappear later by planing it, this could be too deep. And that may be not a pro, but a con for this cutting gauge tool. That's where the wheel gauge might plane out better if that's what you're after. I'd say by the time you get this to show, you've indented it so badly, it's not going to plane out real good. See, again, my all-purpose kind of multi-purpose gauge that I make, they make a better visible line in one pass, but it's actually quite shallow as well. So who's to say? It depends on the application. Clearly in 2 light passes, it's a very useful, usable line. No problem to go around the corners. Now let's try it with the grain. Here's the multi-purpose gauge. That makes a very visible line. I can cut or saw to that. I can see what I'm doing there. It's going to be hard to show on camera. I don't think I can get it to show on camera very well. That line is right here. Let's use the wheel gauge. Multiple passes, I know what it's going to do already because I've tried it. It's an unusable line. It's very, very faint and hard to see. So I don't like the performance of the wheel gauge with the grain in hardwood. On pine, I've tested it. I know it works good. Right there's a good indicator that it is a good line. In poplar, it should be pretty good. That line's very usable. In poplar. So it begins to struggle though on hard woods with the grain. It's just a very hit and miss. The cutting gauge, by the way, is hit and miss. In hardwood with the grain, it'll make the line and you can see it, but the grain will manipulate the gauge and make it move in and out with the grain. And I don't trust a wavy line to saw or plane to. So the cutting gauge is not my choice with the grain in hardwood. Now in softer wood like poplar, it's going to be alright. For a fine grain, consistent, predictable grain, it's going to make a beautiful line. It'll do it in pine pretty well. Make a beautiful, consistent, trustworthy line. A little bit of variance there with the grain. Most of the time, you can work through that, although there's a little bit of variance there that I don't like. Most of it's pretty good. I'd rather have the multi-purpose gauge. Scratches a slightly more aggressive line, but more trustworthy and usable and visible line than my homemade gauge. So there's a few thoughts. Plywoods are a whole other story with soft veneers. They can be very problematic to mark. Your best bet's going to be the cutting gauge. Draw across the grain. If you're going across the veneer, makes a 100% reliable, visible line. Multi-purpose gauges do well if they're sharp. That's a good line, good usable line. More than usable with 1 light pass. 2 passes, it gets even better. Again, I haven't missed out on a thing. Not only have I not missed out with my homemade tools, I'm actually in many cases using the superior tool. Here's the wheel gauge. Does okay. It's denting and bruising the fiber more than it's cutting it. But it makes a very acceptable, usable line. It's that inner middle line. Very usable, very acceptable, with multiple passes. So what's the bottom line? Well, the only other test we could do is end grain. I will show you this. I'll set the camera different and show you some end grain. And it's quite impressive. It may surprise you that once again the homemade gauges, you're not settling for less. Let's see, you get the best edge. This one. You're not just settling or making do. You're getting arguably the best cutting line. Here's the wheel gauge. I'll set this a little past middle, about right there. Make one good firm pass. And that's a very difficult line to see and use and saw to and pare to. I'd have to make multiple passes before that begins to be useful to me in the work that I do. I'll move the camera again and see. You can, if I get it right in the right spot, you can see that line after multiple hard passes. Let's do one comfortable pass. The homemade gauge, I need to set it in a little bit. I'll set it closer to the other edge, like this. One comfortable pass. And that makes a very useful, visible line that I can saw to, pare to, chisel to in one comfortable pass. No funny business, just walk up and make the mark. Again, sharpness matters. Here's my other homemade one. We could go in about midpoint. The other homemade one, it's even sharper yet because I recently sharpened it. I mean, that's as perfect as a line can be, that middle line. Perfect and usable and clean and deep as anything you could want. The knife gauge, cutting gauge, we set it out in here somewhere. Make two decent passes, very fine line, quite usable, almost too fine, but quite usable. So clearly the winner is not the wheel gauge, and it's clearly not the winner in most cases in hardwood. It comes in kind of a middle spot in softwood and soft veneered plywoods. Certainly not to be rejected, but certainly not the best. It's right in there, but it's not the best. It's very acceptable in pine and poplar, not the best. The cutting gauge actually becomes the best choice in pine and probably poplar, the clear winner. So, you know, I can take this cutting gauge all day long and make utterly perfect knife lines. I could saw to that, chisel to that, whatever. Same is true of veneered plywood. I can just make the most superior line with the cutting gauge. So where have I been missing out with this? Where have I been cheating myself by not having this? I don't see it. Am I saying it's a useless tool or not worth having? No, I'm just saying if you don't have one and you feel like I did and say, well, I've been missing out, or there's something I'm missing here because everybody says this is the one I should have. Well, I'm telling you no. That's not the case. It has its place maybe as one more gauge in the kit, and you need multiple gauges. You should be making yourself gauges from time to time, and you'll have, you know, you should be making the washer gauge and using that from time to time. I could do one way near the far edge, and I think you'll see that it does an acceptable job on hard end grain. More than useful, clean, usable line. You know, arguably the worst line in here is the wheel gauge, which was this one right here. So I'm not saying that it's a worthless tool or that everybody's been lying to you or anything like that. I'm just saying I don't feel like I've been cheating myself or missing out. I don't think there's any reason that you should feel compelled to have one of these. And I know there's other people saying, well, you can get into rabbits and clean them up and you sharpen it and do this and turn it into a wonder tool. I don't see that. I don't buy that. If I need to clean out a rabbit or something, I'm going to drag a knife through it. I'm not going to drag this through it. And I'm not going to dip it down into mortises and try to do some funky clean out with it. I'm just going to cut the mortise clean and be done with it. And, you know, I'm not trying to be contrary just for its own sake. I'm just saying, again, it's not something that I think I've missed out on, and you shouldn't feel like it either if you don't have one of these, and I wouldn't rush out to buy one of these. What I would do is make several of homemade ones and make them not necessarily fancy, but make them right and make them work. And make them like this, which I know works and cuts beautiful lines. And is this tip is fileable, sharpenable, replaceable, movable, and so forth. And I'm just saying this is a tried and true tool. Craftsmen made their own years ago in centuries past, and they did it with good reason because these tools work. And make yourself a half a dozen of these and you won't be sorry. Thanks for watching.